Good evening, everybody, and you're listening to Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5. I'm Denise Clay Murray, and I'm joined by my co-host, Larry Glenn, and we are joined by Johann Calhoun, who is the Bureau Chief for Philadelphia Chalkbeat, or Chalkbeat Philadelphia. I always mix that up, and I shouldn't. But thank you for joining us, Johann.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, one of the most recent stories that you did, you've been doing a lot of coverage about the new superintendent of the school district of Philadelphia. And one of the last stories that I read was about this consulting service that the superintendent hired for a whole lot of money before he even went on his listening tour. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the reaction to it, and I guess what the story is with that?
Yeah, well, just to provide some context about the Bureau, it's essentially a two-person team. It's me and senior writer Del Mezzacappa. So at times we kind of trade off who is going to cover a board meeting, which happens either every third or fourth Thursday of every month. So let's see here. So Watlington was hired by the board earlier this year. And at the May meeting, I believe it was May 26th, the week of May 26th, there was an agenda item. And there's usually a large number of agenda items that they have to vote on. And this was agenda item 71. And this is an agenda item that was unanimously voted and approved by the board to contract this consultant firm, this education consultant firm, to provide transition services for Tony Watlington as he adjusts to his new role as superintendent. That's a whole nother story. So the agenda item had the figure listed as $450,000. And it had the consultant agency's name is Joseph and Associates, not to confuse it with Joseph and Associates law firm in Philadelphia. But the person who leads this firm was the former superintendent in Nashville, Tennessee. And right now he's based out of DC in Maryland. So I covered that meeting. And from what I remember, and the recording verifies this, is that there was very little discussion about the contract, who was running the firm, and what exactly the firm would be doing. Even though it kind of says that the firm would be helping Watlington in his transition, but it really didn't outline exactly what the firm would be doing. So, people are wondering and asking, why is this a big deal? I thought it was a big deal because it's not common to hire a consultant or recruit a transition team. It's not normal in Philadelphia for a new superintendent to come to town and for the first order to spend $500,000 on a consultant. And let me back that up. It is normal to hire a consultant or recruit a transition team, just to make that clear. It's not normal in Philadelphia for a new superintendent to come to town and the first order of business is to spend $500,000 on a consultant. That's not normal. It's also not normal that hire not be vetted. And it's obvious that this guy was not vetted the way it should have by the school board. And it's also not normal that you hire someone from out of state, be it Maryland or Tennessee, who is not familiar with the district and give them the responsibility, to lead this plan that is uniquely Philadelphia. And when I say a plan that is uniquely Philadelphia, that's the school board's goals and guardrails. Mm-hmm. So those were the reasons when my boss asked me about proceeding with this and just putting it out there. And, is this the news story? And those were the reasons that I gave her. And we just moved the story. Mind you, like I said, I only have 2 people. I have 2.5 people working in my bureau. It's me and Dale, and we have a freelancer, Nora. And there are tons of things that we could write about with the public education here in Philadelphia. But I just felt that with new leadership and with the new superintendent, because we had Dr. Hyde for like almost 10 years, we had Hyde for like a decade. So for a new person to come to town, I just felt that, you know, his moves, his orders, his directives, his hires should be under the microscope for the sake of the kids. And it's not to just throw him under the bus. All of
Right.
this is for the sake of the kids.
So has he started his listening tour yet? And if so, you know, how do people make sure that they know when the listening tour starts and how they can be a part of it? Because I would think, and this is just, you know, what I observed from watching the superintendent hiring process. They brought in a guy whose last job was at a school district that was as big as the one I went to high school in. And that's not big.
Mm.
So how can people make sure that they're part of the listening tour so that when, you know, he comes in, they can ask him questions, they know where to go?
Yeah, so you're referring to the listening and learning tour that, you know, that's happening, you know, his first 100 days in office. I do not have the correct URL, but if your listening audience can go to the school district's website, there is a page that directs people to sign up to partake in that tour and to ask questions. So, you know, this is where we are with him. There are specific directives. He has like 3 phases that spanned out until, I believe, like next spring, the latter part of May, in which he's supposed to craft a detailed plan and how he plans on achieving the goals and guardrails. So this is like leading up to that. So it's like I said, I don't want to completely throw him under the bus, but I guess this is his strategy. But my thing, and I think other people are kind of criticizing, like, you're coming on board to lead one of the largest school districts in the country. Philadelphia has problems across the board. You should automatically have talking points. Graduation rates, test scores, student performance after they graduate. Are they working? Those should be talking points, immediate talking points. That is what Philadelphians want to hear. So if they're not hearing that, and if they're seeing that you're hiring someone for like $500,000, especially someone from Philadelphia, then it's going to kind of raise some red flags.
Okay. Now he announced his transition team, which is co-chaired by Andrea Custis, who's the president and CEO of the Urban League of Philadelphia, and Dr. Guy Generals, who is the president of the Community College of Philadelphia. Can you talk a little bit about this transition team and what it's going to be expected to do? Because I'm looking at it now, and it's got a lot of heavy hitters on it.
Yeah, it's a lot of heavy hitters. I describe this as Wallington casting a big net, because you really can't fail. Well, you can fail, but you know, you can find success with an 80-member team, especially with the 80-member team, with the kind of people that he has on his team. You know, you mentioned Guy Generals and you mentioned Andrea Custis from the Urban League, and they're going to be like the co-chairs leading this effort. But you know, you have 80 people, you know, some heavy hitters, like you have Sharif El Mekki, who is well known in the community. Let's see here.
Well, you also have the interim dean at Temple School of College of Education.
Yeah, and he also brought on the guy that used to lead the school district in New Orleans, and the young lady who just wrote the book about reform in education reform in Philadelphia. She's now in Baltimore, Kamika Royale. So, you know, he should be commended for this move. I feel he should be commended in reaching out and getting support. You know, because the list here is a mix of national and local heavy hitters. So I do feel like he should be commended in reaching out to the community because he obviously did that. I just think that it shouldn't take this long to provide some kind of blueprint or immediate blueprint because the situation right now with the schools is rather dire. You know, the literacy rate, you know, we have, 30%, under 30% of third graders are reading at third grade level. It's just all throughout the goals and guardrails, things that he needs to be touching on right now, immediately. Especially, we are almost in August, and I believe students return. I think they return August 29th. So he needs to have something in place, like a short-term plan in place before those kids get back. Did I answer?
Now, well, yeah, now to our listeners who might not know what goals and guardrails are, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, the goals and guardrails was crafted by the school board last year, as well as Dr. Hyde, and this is how they measure the kind of work that they're doing, the success that they're doing. So there are certain benchmarks within goals and guardrails. They take a look at literacy, they take a look at math scores, language arts, race and equity is also a big thing right now. So at the end of the school year, they take a look at these benchmarks that's supposed to be made. And if you're not performing as a leader, be it the superintendent or the body, school board body themselves, they hold themselves accountable. Now, I'm not sure how they plan on holding themselves accountable, but in regards to the superintendent, it's kind of easy. You know, if he or she fails at this, then they push that person out.
Okay. Well, I'd like to turn it over to Larry McGlynn. Larry, do you have any questions?
I do. Thank you, Denise. And Mr. Calhoun, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah.
The first thing I'd like to ask you about, this is, I guess, a two-parter. First of all, how much impact and how much change can a new superintendent actually make based on the conditions that already exist? And what does that organizational structure look like? So you have the superintendent, who reports to them, and how does that sort of disperse all the way down to the teachers who work in the schools?
Well, it depends on the person's vision. It's important for someone to come in and to have a vision. Dr. Hyde, he had, his footprint is deeply embedded in the school district now because he was here for like a decade. So it's upon the person coming in, whether you want to follow him and basically follow his plan, and that's keeping his staff, or do you want to come in with your own staff and with your own plan? And that kind of goes back to the criticism people are criticizing Dr. Wallington, is that one, he's coming from a much smaller school district of 14,000 students, and be it he was only there for like within a year. I don't even think he was there for a year, but the school district before that, it was like 70,000 students. But give or take, if you step into a school district as large as Philadelphia, in a city like Philadelphia with so many problems, you need to have some kind of vision. So that's number one. And you might say, okay, this is one person and you have a school board, and then you have 124,000 district students. And if you include the charter schools, it's about 200,000 students. So what can one person do? That one person can do a lot. It comes down to the relations with the school board. It comes down to achieving, now you have the goals and guardrails. How hard are you going to stick with that? How hard do you want to achieve those goals and guardrails? So yes, the one person can come in and make a lot of success, and one person can come in and make failure.
Now, we had 10 years of Dr. Hyde, and I think it's safe to say we understand what his agenda was, what his goals were. It may be too early to make an assessment on this yet, but with Dr. Wallington, do you see key differences, or do you think it's going to be a similar path to what Dr. Hyde started?
I don't think it's going to be. Let me back up. I think it's still early, and I think people are still trying to fill him out, like his direction. Um, he has said before that he's going to keep many of the higher ups in place. I do think that it's smart for him to keep people like Yuri Monson in place, who's the chief financial officer. I believe the communications office, he's keeping that office in place. So it's really hard to assess the differences between Watlington and Hyde, what we're going to get from him. Really, it is, because he really hasn't provided much, except for the Listing Learning Tour. And, we got this guy, Sean Joseph, who was leading this education consulting agency. And then you have the 80-person team. So that's all that we really have to go off of right now.
Yesterday, we conducted an interview with State Representative Chris Rabb, and that's going to air also on our program with this interview. And he talked about education funding from the state coming to Philadelphia. We're seeing somewhat of an increase. Do you have any indication about how that money will be utilized, how it could be helping? Any thoughts on that right now, or is it a little too early for that?
Well, the good thing, Wolf approved a $1.8 billion budget to provide the district with $410 million in new funding, plus an additional $145 million in charter savings. So, with that money and with the ESSER money coming from the White House, things are fine temporarily. But after 2026, because I believe the district has until 2026 to spend the ESSER money. After that, once we get into 2027, things get kind of foggy. So it's kind of depending on how proactive people are, how proactive Wallington is, how proactive Yuri Monson is. Well, Monson basically laid out a warning at the last school board meeting, and he basically said, 2027, we're going to hit a deficit. So, which I think is smart, but I don't know. It's up in the air on how Watlington is going to proceed or how he wants to use that money. We are faced with a staffing shortage. We are faced with unsafe buildings before and after the pandemic, and we're dealing with a decline in enrollment. So that money can be used in so many places. We still also have issues with asbestos. So yeah, I think it's critical to have Jerry Jordan and the teachers union at the table in deciding how that money is going to be spent. But I shouldn't assume, but my thinking is that they've already decided that.
I would think so. So the last thing I'd like to ask you, so we have our new superintendent. School starts at the end of August, and he's going to be doing these listening and learning tours throughout the city. What are some things that people should be looking for in terms of major dates that are coming up, and then just things that will give us an idea as to what direction he'll be taking the school district?
Yeah. So this transition phase, he has 3 phases here. And we're going to keep track in regards to deadlines that they're supposed to make behind the scenes, building up to what's supposed to happen in the spring. May 30th, I believe that is the date. People should take note, because that is when he is charged with, or he has given himself the responsibility of coming out with a strategic plan and how he plans on taking on the goals and guardrails. So they have gone back, and I noticed with the agenda item, and I talked to my boss the other day, they have actually changed some dates listed within the 3-phase plan of when they're supposed to do certain things like site tours, assessing situations and following this at this time. They have changed dates within that time frame. So the ultimate date that people should wait on should be May 30th, when this guy is supposed to come out with this plan to take on goals and guardrails. Because everything else is kind of foggy right now. They are changing dates. So they're telling people to go to the website. They're constantly updating the website. So unless you are reading Chalkbeat, you would know these things.
Which everybody should do. I'd like to turn it back over to Denise Clay Murray.
Thank you. I have one last question for you, Johann, and it's based on something I saw you talking about on Facebook. You were at a school board meeting, and it was nearing the 11th o'clock hour. And I've seen other people tweeting from school board meetings that have, cut right into Jimmy Kimmel and stuff like that. Have they addressed what they're going to do about the fact that you have these school board meetings that sometimes go into the next day?
They have not. I do know that there are portions of the meeting are mandated by law. They have to discuss those things at that particular board meeting, but I do think that they can cut some portions down and, let's say, cut the meeting in half, have 2 meetings a month possibly, or have like a quarterly meeting that would address constituent needs, let's say student speakers or public registered speakers. That way you can give them more time to speak, because right now it's like 2 minutes. And I believe it used to be much longer than that. So there are ways in which they can restructure the meetings. They need to restructure the meetings, because right now it's not productive. It's not conducive, and it's not conducive for proper thinking when you are voting on action items. Because a lot of times they're voting on like at least 80 action items, and if it's like 11 o'clock or almost midnight, there's no way you can think things through, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today, Johann. We really appreciate it. This is Johann Calhoun, the Bureau Chief for Chalkbeat Philadelphia. And if you're not reading Chalkbeat Philadelphia, you really should, because you get really good information from that. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.